As Nikesa sat quietly at the edge of the celebration, sipping from her bottle of Bissa, a strange chill swept over her when a wild-looking man stumbled into the gathering, his hair tangled and eyes burning with something between madness and fire. He pointed at the Bissa bottles scattered across the tables and shouted in a voice that pierced the room like a drumbeat in the night, "You're not drinking real Bissa, that one is cursed." Laughter erupted around her like a roaring fire, everyone dismissing him as another madman spinning tales of nothing. But Nikesa felt her hand tremble, and the bottle slipped from her grip, crashing to the floor and spilling its red contents. Like blood on the white tiles, her heart beating violently as the man's warning echoed in her chest. The name Kamaria surged into her thoughts, her sudden wealth, her unmatched fame, the addictive taste of her drink, it all tangled into one unsettling feeling that Nikesa could no longer ignore, for she had always heard the old whispers about madmen seeing what others could not. And that night, as the moon slid across the Kazanga sky, she lay restless, unable to sleep, her mind spiraling with questions, a voice inside urging her not to brush off the madness she'd witnessed. Determined, she did something bold. She had secretly taken a bottle of Kamaria's Bissa home and, under the pale kitchen light, she poured it into a wooden bowl and set it before her dog Bobo, who sniffed it, growled low, and jumped back, barking sharply, sending a shiver down her spine. Then she poured her own leftover Bissa into another bowl, and Bobo drank it gladly, his tail wagging, which made Nikisa's stomach drop, her suspicion turning into certainty. There was something deeply wrong with Kamaria's brew. The next morning, long before dawn, she crept silently through the paths behind Kuru Square and tiptoed to the back of Kamaria's popular Bissa shop, her heart pounding, driven by a bitter cocktail of fear, envy, and burning curiosity, whispering to herself that today she would uncover whatever strange thing Kamaria had been putting into that irresistible drink. For weeks, she had watched customers swarm to Kamaria's stand while her own remained deserted. And now, crouched low in a dark corner outside the kitchen, hidden from sight, she watched as Kamaria moved gracefully around steaming pots and neatly arranged empty bottles. At first, everything seemed ordinary fruit, herbs, boiling water, but then something happened that twisted Nikisa's gut. Kamaria untied her shuka fabric, reached beneath her gown, and pulled out a cloth soaked in dark red, then, without hesitation, dropped it into the bubbling pot, stirring the liquid calmly as though it were a sacred ritual, letting the blood blend seamlessly with the deep red of the Bissa. Nikisa's breath caught, her hand flying to her mouth to silence her gasp as Kamaria funneled the mixture into bottles, one by one, her face calm, focused, shameless. Nikisa sat frozen in horror, her mind spinning with disbelief, trying to convince herself it was a dream, a nightmare. But it wasn't. It was real, painfully real. And as the initial shock melted into disgust and then into rage, she whispered to herself, "So this is her secret." And when she returned home, the memory kept replaying like a curse, every image seared into her thoughts, every sound echoing in her ears. Pacing her small room, she muttered aloud, wondering if it was the blood that gave Kamaria's Bissa its addictive sweetness, or something even darker, something magical, something forbidden. And as she wrestled with the thought, a dangerous idea crept into her mind. Perhaps she should confront Kamaria, demand to be taught the full method, and if Kamaria refused, then Nikisa would expose her to the entire village and watch her reputation collapse while her own Bissa reclaimed its place. She laughed bitterly to herself and said, Last, people no day resist sweet thing." But as her plan took shape, old memories surfaced of Makiba Hall, of laughter and secrets, of youth service days in Kabira where she and Kamaria had been like sisters, inseparable, sharing life's joys and burdens, both marrying wealthy, loving men and parting with promises to stay close. And now here she was, plotting against the same woman she once called family, whispering into the silence, "How did we end up here?" Though deep down, she already knew the answer. Once, Kamaria and her husband Kobena lived a comfortable life in the bustling city of Kazonga, raising their 3 beautiful daughters in a lovely home filled with joy and laughter. But everything shifted like dust in the wind when Kobena received a transfer letter, moving him to the oil fields of the southern Delta province. Kamaria had begged him with trembling lips and eyes full of tears to take them all along, to keep the family together, but Kobena had waved her off with a soft pat on the back and a hollow promise. "Don't worry, I'll come home every weekend," he'd said with a tired smile, but he never told her the truth, that he had no intention of returning often, for his heart and loyalty now belonged to his powerful boss, Madame Margaret, who dangled promises of riches before him like ripe mangoes, in exchange for his devotion. At first, Kobena did keep his word, appearing every weekend like clockwork, but soon the visits thinned until months went by without a call or a coin, leaving Kamaria drowning in silence and abandoned with 3 hungry mouths to feed, going from wealth to scraping for survival as her youngest, barely 5, cried from hunger while she held her close, whispering words of comfort. She no longer believed herself. One fateful afternoon, walking the dusty streets in search of any kind of job, Kamaria stumbled upon a long line of students outside a school, clustered around a woman selling bissa in glass bottles that caught the sunlight like rubies, and for a moment, hope flickered. Maybe I can sell bissa too, she thought, but reality rushed back in, and she sighed bitterly, knowing she had no money or skill to begin. Determined, she approached the school gate to speak to anyone but the guard. A lanky, smug-faced man named Musa blocked her path, mocking her for not having an access card, and when she challenged his arrogance, he merely shrugged, replying, "At least you know," before her frustration burst, and she slipped him a wrinkled note from her pocket. His smile spread instantly, and the gate swung open. Inside, the principal confirmed her worst fear. There were no openings, not even for cleaning, and dejected, dusty, and parched, she dragged her feet back to the roadside, stopping to buy water from the same bissa vendor, and as fate would have it, the woman behind the stand was none other than Nekesa, her long-lost friend. They stared at each other in stunned silence before falling into a warm embrace, tears springing to Kamaria's eyes as Nekesa exclaimed, "Kamaria, it's been years. What happened to you?" And Kamaria, unable to hold it in, poured out everything, from Kobena's betrayal to her children's hunger, her voice cracking under the weight of grief. Moved by the sorrow of her old friend, Nekesa shared her own pain, that her husband's family had thrown her out for not bearing children. And though her voice shook, she said, "At least you don't hear hungry children cry at night," to which Kamaria whispered, "Every day I watch them suffer, and it breaks me." With a sigh, Nekesa reached into her pouch and pressed a crumpled 5,000 naira note into Kamaria's hand. "Take this. Feed your girls. I'll visit later," she said with kindness that wrapped around Kamaria like a warm cloth. And she did return that evening, heartbreaking as she saw the children's sunken eyes and empty bowls, and without hesitation, Nekesa pulled Kamaria aside and said with firm conviction, "I'll teach you how to make bessa. I'll lend you money. You're not alone in this." And Kamaria wept with gratitude, hugging her tightly, feeling for the first time in months the soft light of hope return. The very next day, Nekesa kept her promise, welcoming Kamaria into her modest kitchen and patiently guiding her through the sacred steps of crafting delicious bissa, explaining that the magic was in the balance, the patience, the freshness of ingredients, not just the mix. Kamaria listened with the sharpness of a woman clinging to salvation, scribbling notes, nodding eagerly, thanking Nekesa again and again, her eyes shining not just with tears, but with purpose. With her friend's loan and her own determination, Kamaria headed to the market at first light, buying bottles, spices, and everything she needed, returning home to prepare her first batch with trembling fingers and a racing heart, following every instruction with precision. Once done, she carried her cooler with pride to the roadside near the school, just as Nikesa had done, setting up her little stall and waiting, hoping. At first, a few passers-by stopped, tasted, nodded politely. But most kept walking, their eyes searching for the familiar stand Nikisa's. And as the sun began to fall, Kamaria returned home disheartened, her shoulders heavy with disappointment, muttering, "Why don't they buy from me?" And the next day brought more of the same, slow sales, fading spirit, and eventually, she confided in Nikesa with moist eyes, saying, "I did everything you showed me, why is it not working?" To which Nikesa placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said softly, "It takes time, Kamaria. No one builds trust overnight, they will come. Just wait." But waiting grew harder with each day that passed, and soon, Kamaria's hope soured into resentment as she watched the steady line at Nikisa's stand grow longer while hers remained bare. Envy bloomed in her heart like a thorny vine. What if Nikesa didn't teach me everything? She thought bitterly, what if she kept the real secret to herself? And slowly, without a word, she began to drift away, convinced that Nikesa had kept the true secret of the Bissa recipe from her. Kamaria spent her nights lying awake beneath her worn mosquito net, staring at the ceiling and wondering if the help she received had been wrapped in deceit. Did Nikesa truly care? Or had she handed her just enough to let her fail with dignity? The thoughts gnawed at her like termites on old wood, growing darker each night, feeding her resentment until it became hard to smile even in front of her children. Then, one sultry afternoon, a well-dressed man named Mr. Otieno, a frequent buyer with a sharp look in his eye, stopped at her stand and, noticing her weary expression, asked softly, "Why the long face, Madame Kamaria?" Forcing a weak smile, she confessed, "Business hasn't been good," and Otieno leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I can help you turn things around, but you'll need to open your mind to less conventional methods," which made Kamaria raise an eyebrow, curiosity flickering like a candle in wind. "Unconventional? What do you mean?" she asked, and he replied with a sly smile, "Let's just say it involves a little dark magic." At first she recoiled. Dark magic? She whispered, unsure whether to laugh or run, but then, like a tide returning to shore, she thought of her hungry children, their thin arms, their sunken cheeks, the empty pots in her kitchen, and she swallowed hard. "What kind of magic are you talking about?" she asked, her voice low, and Otieno promised to return the next morning with details that would transform her fortunes. True to his word, he came back early, his eyes serious, and his voice flat as he handed her a folded paper with steps. "Make your Bissa irresistible. You must add a piece of yourself. Your blood, your menstrual blood," he said, and Kamaria nearly dropped the paper, her body trembling. "You mean, serve people my blood?" she asked, horrified, but Otieno only nodded, calm as stone. "Think of the money, the life you want for your children. Isn't it worth it?" The rest of the day passed in a blur of internal screams, tears, and trembling fingers. Kamaria battled herself in silence, disgust rising with each thought, but so did the hunger for escape, for ease, for dignity, and by nightfall, the scales tipped. She stood in her dim, smoky kitchen, heart pounding, mind haunted, and slowly loosened her kitten's cloth, reaching down with shaking hands to retrieve the bloodied pad, her chest heaving as she whispered, "God forgive me," and dropped it into the bubbling basin of Bissa, the crimson fluid blending with the dark juice as she stirred slowly, steam clouding her eyes like a curse sealing itself. The next morning, Kamaria sorted the bottles, some with the tainted Bissa, some pure, and when a mother approached her stand with her children asking for drinks, Kamaria hesitated, her eyes on the glowing red bottles, then nodded, selling them. The blood-infused ones, and to her shock, they returned moments later smiling wide. "This Bissa is so sweet, so rich." The mother beamed, and her children nodded excitedly, begging for more. That day, every bottle, both clean and cursed, sold out before sunset, and for the first time, Kamaria stood breathless, watching people rush toward her, feeling a twisted joy dance beside her guilt. She couldn't believe it. Later, unable to contain her strange happiness, she rushed to Nakisa's stall, her voice bright, her smile wide. "Nakisa, I sold everything." She shouted, and Nakisa looked up in shock, blinking at the sudden change in her friend, whose eyes now glimmered with a strange fire, so unlike the tired Kamaria she'd seen in past weeks. "That's wonderful," Nakisa said, pulling her into a warm hug. Though a small flicker of doubt sparked in her chest, something felt off, but she said nothing, choosing instead to celebrate the moment. Kamaria, her words thick with gratitude and guilt, said, "It's all because of your encouragement," then spent the evening beside Nakisa, laughing as they had years ago, though the secret she now held clawed silently inside her. The next day, Kamaria repeated the process, preparing the cursed mixture with grim resolve, convincing herself that this was the only way to feed her family and keep this new tide of fortune flowing. And once again, customers flooded her stall, praising her bissa with glowing words, students and teachers alike forming lines to buy what they now called the sweetest drink in town. And just like that, the business that once limped now sprinted ahead of all others, including Nakisa's, lifting Kamaria to sudden fame. But deep inside, the truth grew darker. Even Nakisa, who had once been Kamaria's greatest supporter, couldn't help but notice the sudden shift, the way her own customers were slipping away, day by day, as more and more people flocked to Kamaria's bissa stand, praising its richness, its sweetness, its irresistible charm. Kamaria claimed she'd simply refined the recipe, added a few more spices, used fresher ingredients, but Nakisa's instincts whispered otherwise, though she tried to silence them, blaming jealousy, fatigue, or maybe just coincidence. Still, something didn't sit right, and by the end of the month, Kamaria had become the most talked about vendor in all of Ikaru Square, her fame stretching beyond the village, even as Nakisa and others quietly suffered the loss of loyal buyers. Kamaria felt guilt sometimes. How could she not? After all, Nakisa had once lifted her from hunger, yet the taste of wealth was sweet, and the feeling of security was stronger than shame. Her children now studied in the best schools, her family had moved into a spacious apartment, and she had begun hiring staff to manage her booming business. She was climbing, and she wasn't ready to stop. One day, Kamaria was asked to supply bissa for a grand birthday celebration. Bright tents, music, people dressed in fine fabrics, and among the guests sat Nakisa, invited by a mutual friend. When the bissa was served, Nakisa sipped it eagerly. But as the rich taste flooded her tongue, her eyes widened. This was not the drink she had taught Kamaria to make. No, this was something else, something deeper. And for a moment, her heart burned with betrayal. So she kept secrets from me, she thought bitterly. As she sat brooding, a disheveled man stumbled into the party, wild-eyed and filthy, pointing at the bissa bottles and yelling, "You fools are drinking blood. That's not bissa, it's blood." And while the crowd burst into mocking laughter, Nakisa's cup slipped from her hand, the red liquid splashing across the floor as her heart pounded blood. Could the madman know something? The suspicion that had been growing in her now pulsed like a drumbeat. Kamaria's wealth, the way her drink enchanted people, the strange taste, it all connected like pieces of a riddle whispered in the wind. Unable to let it go, Nakisa collected one of Kamaria's empty bottles from the party and took it home. That night, she poured the leftover bissa into a bowl and offered it to Bobo, who sniffed once, growled, and backed away barking, refusing to drink. Her chest tightened, and just to be certain, she placed her own bissa in a second bowl. Bobo wagged his tail and drank it happily, and with that, all doubts died. Something was truly wrong with Kamaria's drink, and Nakisa's mind, now burning with fury and disbelief, vowed to uncover the truth. Pretending to make a friendly visit, she went to Kamaria's home the next day, smiling through clenched teeth, exchanging warm pleasantries before slipping in her question. Kamaria, you've grown so fast, and your bissa tastes different now. Please, as your friend, won't you share your secret with me? But Kamaria, though briefly startled, regained her composure quickly and laughed it off, insisting there was no secret, just hard work and fresh ingredients. But Nikesa wasn't fooled, and over the next several days she pressed again and again, each time met with denial, until Kamaria snapped in frustration. Is it because you helped me once when I had nothing? Is that why you won't stop? Just name your price, Nikesa, and leave me in peace. And in that moment, Nikesa knew she had been right all along. Determined to see it with her own eyes, she planned her move. That very night, as the crickets chirped under a pale moon, Nikasa crept through narrow paths to Kamaria's shop, her heart heavy with anger and heartbreak, her footsteps silent as shadow, and hid behind a stack of wooden crates at the back, crouched low, peering through the dusty kitchen window. Inside, Kamaria moved under the flickering light of a small lantern, steam rising as she prepared another batch of bissa, her motions calm and practiced, boiling, straining, sweetening. But just as Nikesa began to doubt herself, to wonder if this was all just a bitter fantasy, Kamaria paused, looked briefly toward the window, then reassured, untied her wrapper. What Nikesa saw next stole the breath from her lungs. Kamaria reached beneath her clothes, retrieved a blood-soaked menstrual cloth, and dropped it into the steaming pot of bissa, stirring slowly, deliberately, as the blood merged with the dark red liquid, thickening it, changing it. Frozen in horror, Nikesa pressed her hand to her mouth, trying not to cry out, her body trembling, her mind screaming, "This is it, this is what she's been doing." And then, hands shaking, she reached into her wrapper, pulled out her phone, and began to record, capturing every detail: the cloth, the stirring, the bottles, the satisfied expression on Kamaria's face as she poured the finished brew into containers. Unable to bear it any longer, Nikesa backed away from the window, the truth burning in her heart like fire, and though she had the proof, she also had a choice to make, one that would decide not just Kamaria's fate, but her own. Nikesa slipped away from the window, her breath caught in her throat, and darted through the dark alleys of the village like a ghost fleeing a nightmare, her heart pounding like drums of war as her thoughts spun in wild circles. When she finally reached home, she collapsed into a wooden chair, the phone still clutched tightly in her trembling hand. She unlocked it and replayed the video again and again, as if hoping each time it might show something else. But no, the image was clear, undeniable. Kamaria, her oldest friend, the woman she once laughed and cried with, had betrayed everything, stirring her own blood into the bissa they had once made with love. Tears blurred Nikesa's eyes as the storm of emotions inside her swelled: disgust, grief, betrayal, rage, and she whispered to the empty room, "How could you do this? To people, to children?" Even Bobo's refusal to drink made more sense now. "God help us," she murmured. But then, like a serpent slipping into the garden of her thoughts, another idea slithered in. This could be her chance to reclaim her place, to rise again while Kamaria fell. But at what cost? Would she become a monster too? Nikesa paced through the night, torn in half, knowing that what she did next would change both their lives forever: justice or mercy, betrayal or redemption. In the gray light of morning, she made her choice, not the law, not yet, but one final chance for truth. She went to Kamaria's house unannounced, gripping the phone tightly in her palm, her face blank, her heart heavy, and when Kamaria opened the door with a bright smile and a chirpy, "Nikesa!" What a surprise! Nikesa's voice came out cold, almost flat. "Thanks," she said, stepping inside the gleaming home filled with polished tiles and luxurious drapes. Kamaria was thriving, but at what price? As they sat, Kamaria poured her water and began making small talk, but Nikesa leaned in, voice low. "Kamaria, I know your secret. And in that moment, the smile vanished from Kamaria's face, her hand frozen midair. What secret? She asked with forced laughter, but her voice cracked as Nekesa replied, I saw everything last night. I recorded it. I know what you're putting in your bissa. Kamaria's color drained, her lips parted but no words came, and finally she whispered, What are you going to do? Nekesa's voice wavered with emotion. How did we get here? You were my sister, Kamaria. How could you do this to people, to your own children? They drink it too. Kamaria broke, her eyes flooding with tears as she buried her face in her hands. I never meant for it to happen this way. She sobbed. I was desperate, Nekesa-mai. Children were starving, and I just wanted a better life. I never thought it would go this far, but Nekesa's voice rose, sharp with pain. You call this success? Poisoning people for profit. How do you sleep at night? And Kamaria cried out, It's not poison, it's just blood, harmless. They love it, they keep coming back. Nekesa stepped back, horrified at how far her friend had fallen into self-deception, and Kamaria, desperate now, dropped to her knees, clutching at her wrapper. Please, Nekesa, don't expose me. I'll pay you, give you anything. Don't destroy what I've built. But Nekesa shook her head slowly. This isn't about money, it's about what's right. I gave you a chance to tell the truth, and you didn't. So now I will. Kamaria's sorrow twisted into fury, her eyes flashing as she cried, If you expose me, you're no better than I am. You'll ruin my life, my children's lives. Is that what you want? But Nekesa only stood in silence, her face firm, then turned and walked away, not looking back. That very day, she took the video to the village elders and school authorities. The footage shocked everyone. Word spread through Ekaru like a wildfire driven by dry winds. By sunrise, health officials had shut Kamaria's stand and police had arrested her. In court, the video played on loop, every second tightening the grip of horror on the faces of those who once praised her parents, teachers, neighbors. All turned against her, their admiration now replaced with outrage and disgust. The woman once celebrated for her sweet bissa was now condemned as a fraud, accused of endangering public health for selfish gain. The judge's gavel fell like thunder, years behind bars. And as Kamaria was led away in chains, Nekesa stood outside the courthouse, the weight of justice and grief resting equally on her shoulders. She had done the right thing, but at the cost of a friendship that once felt like family.